As we go through this, I want to discuss not just the trade-offs between adding collateral to make the system safer and the costs associated with that. I want to also talk about cases in which we don't have to have a trade-off. We can do the same or nearly the same amount of financial services, meaning risk transfer and wholesale capital markets, with significantly less use of collateral. That's going to be the core discussion. But there's no doubt, as the others have emphasized, that the more collateral we use, the safer our counterparties. That's good, financial stability. And generally speaking, the more that we use, there are costs. There are two kinds of costs. I want to make a distinction. One of those kinds of costs is basically, has been emphasized by Manmohan in particular, which is slowing down the circulation of financial assets that you might want to have access to. So things like treasuries, if they're tied up in a certain place in a segregated collateral pool, then they're less available to serve the needs of investors generally, and that has a cost. The other kind of cost is not really a deadweight loss to the system. It's a transfer from, it turns out empirically, the dealers are mainly bearing the costs in terms of their shareholders, providing more effective capital buffer or liquidity buffer to their creditors, so amounts to a transfer. I'm going to come back to that. So all of these new regulations, Dodd-Frank and MiFID, in the case of derivatives and capital regulations, have been, generally speaking, increasing collateral demands, although the capital regulations are causing the dealers to try to economize on the use of collateral because that often reduces their regulatory capital requirements, which is what they're anxious to do. And what we're seeing right now is a very significant shift by the dealers, the dealer community, to economize on the use of collateral by doing things like trade compression. Just to give you an example, one firm, TriOptima, has now effectively eliminated about $200 trillion of notional positions in the interest rate swap market. I'll come back to that, simply by eliminating unnecessary circles of exposures. Another method that's being used is central clearing. Now, we've all been brought to believe that central clearing actually increases the amount of collateral in the system. Well, that's true because central clearing parties require initial margin from all participants. But under new regulation, dealers in particular would be required to provide initial margin anyway. And I'll show you that central clearing actually reduces collateral needs once you assume that the dealers are going to have to put up initial margin for all of their positions anyway. Something new that you haven't seen yet, probably, but is coming over the horizon, is central clearing of repurchase agreements and also central clearing of securities lending. And that is likely to economize on the amount of these securities that are tied up in one place or another by shortening those chains of transactions that Manmohan spoke about, so that we can do more, we can provide more services with those securities at lower velocity without really impairing the usefulness of those securities to the system.